He shut himself in his room, and tried to read, but his eye glanced over the page without understanding a word, and he threw away the book, and for the second time sat down to sketch his plan, the ladders and the fence. At length the hour drew near. Never did a man deeply in love allow the clocks to go on peacefully. Morel tormented his so effectually that they struck 8 at 6:30. He then said, "It is time to start." The signature was indeed fixed to take place at 9 o'clock, but perhaps Valentine will not wait for that. Consequently, Morel, having left the Rue Meslay at 8:30 by his timepiece, entered the clover field while the clock of Saint Philippe du Relais was striking 8. The horse and cabriolet were concealed behind a small ruin, where Morel had often waited. The night gradually drew on, and the foliage in the garden assumed a deeper hue. Then Morel came out from his hiding place with a beating heart, and looked through the small opening in the gate. There was yet no one to be seen. The clock struck 8:30, and still another half hour was passed in waiting, while Morel walked to and fro, and gazed more and more frequently through the opening. The garden became darker still, but in the darkness he looked in vain for the white dress, and in the silence he vainly listened for the sound of footsteps. The house, which was discernible through the trees, remained in darkness, and gave no indication that so important an event as the signature of a marriage contract was going on. Morel looked at his watch, which wanted 10:15, but soon the same clock he had already heard strike 2 or 3 times rectified the error by striking 9:30. This was already half an hour past the time Valentine had fixed. It was a terrible moment for the young man. The slightest rustling of the foliage, the least whistling of the wind, attracted his attention, and drew the perspiration to his brow. Then he tremblingly fixed his ladder, and, not to lose a moment, placed his foot on the first step. Amidst all these alternations of hope and fear, the clock struck 10. "It is impossible," said Maximilian, "that the signing of a contract should occupy so long a time without unexpected interruptions. I have weighed all the chances, calculated the time required for all the forms. Something must have happened." And then he walked rapidly to and fro, and pressed his burning forehead against the fence. Had Valentine fainted? Or had she been discovered and stopped in her flight? These were the only obstacles which appeared possible to the young man. The idea that her strength had failed her in attempting to escape, and that she had fainted in one of the paths, was the one that most impressed itself upon his mind. In that case, said he, I should lose her, and by my own fault. He dwelt on this idea for a moment, then it appeared reality. He even thought he could perceive something on the ground at a distance. He ventured to call, and it seemed to him that the wind wafted back an almost inarticulate sigh. At last the half-hour struck. It was impossible to wait longer, his temples throbbed violently, his eyes were growing dim, he passed one leg over the wall, and in a moment leapt down on the other side. He was on Villefort's premises, had arrived there by scaling the wall. What might be the consequences? However, he had not ventured thus far to draw back. He followed a short distance close under the wall, then crossed a path, had entered a clump of trees. In a moment he had passed through them, and could see the house distinctly. Then Morel saw that he had been right in believing that the house was not illuminated. Instead of lights at every window, as is customary on days of ceremony, he saw only a grey mass, which was veiled also by a cloud, which at that moment obscured the moon's feeble light. A light moved rapidly from time to time past 3 windows of the second floor. These 3 windows were in Madame de Saint Méran's room. Another remained motionless behind some red curtains which were in Madame de Villefort's bedroom. Morel guessed all this. So many times, in order to follow Valentine in thought at every hour in the day, had he made her describe the whole house, that without having seen it he knew it all. This darkness and silence alarmed Morel still more than Valentine's absence had done. Almost mad with grief, and determined to venture everything in order to see Valentine once more, and be certain of the misfortune he feared, Morel gained the edge of the clump of trees, and was going to pass as quickly as possible through the flower garden, when the sound of a voice, still at some distance, but which was borne upon the wind, reached him. At this sound, As he was already partially exposed to view, he stepped back and concealed himself completely, remaining perfectly motionless. He had formed his resolution. If it was Valentine alone, he would speak as she passed; if she was accompanied, and he could not speak, still he should see her, and know that she was safe; if they were strangers, he would listen to their conversation, and might understand something of this hitherto incomprehensible mystery. The moon had just then escaped from behind the cloud which had concealed it, and Morel saw Villefort come out upon the steps, followed by a gentleman in black. They descended, and advanced towards the clump of trees, and Morel soon recognized the other gentleman as Dr. d'Avrigny. The young man, seeing them approach, drew back mechanically, until he found himself stopped by a sycamore tree in the center of the clump. There he was compelled to remain. Soon the two gentlemen stopped also. "Ah, my dear doctor," said the procureur, "heaven declares itself against my house." "What a dreadful death! What a blow!" "Seek not to console me, alas! Nothing can alleviate so great a sorrow, the wound is too deep and too fresh." "Dead, dead." The cold sweat sprang to the young man's brow, and his teeth chattered. Who could be dead in that house, which Villefort himself had called accursed? "My dear M. de Villefort," replied the doctor, with a tone which redoubled the terror of the young man, "I have not led you here to console you, on the contrary. "What can you mean?" asked the procureur, alarmed. "I mean that behind the misfortune which has just happened to you, there is another, perhaps, still greater." "Can it be possible?" murmured Villefort, clasping his hands. "What are you going to tell me?" "Are we quite alone, my friend?" "Yes, quite, but why all these precautions?" "Because I have a terrible secret to communicate to you," said the doctor. "Let us sit down." Villefort fell, rather than seated himself. The doctor stood before him, with one hand placed on his shoulder. Morel, horrified, supported his head with one hand, and with the other pressed his heart, lest its beatings should be heard. "Dead, dead," repeated he within himself, and he felt as if he were also dying. Speak, doctor, I am listening, said Villefort. Strike, I am prepared for everything. Madame de Saint-Méran was, doubtless, advancing in years, but she enjoyed excellent health.